This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Five Starr Wrestling Report, coming at you live here on Friday afternoon. Nah, that didn't work. I was going to try to do a whole opening monologue with the Lance Russell voice. Still haven't quite got that one down. I should start every podcast now with a wrestler impression and see who can pick up on who it's supposed to be. Can't do Dusty because everybody will immediately know who it is. I'll think of something. Been at this for 3 years. You'd think at some point I would come up with a clever intro aside from the one that's canned in for the first 30 seconds of the show. I just never really thought all that much about it. Nothing's ever come to mind. If I'm going to do something, I want it to be consistently good. I know how to do my plugs, though. So let's get those out of the way. Folks, you are tuning into the Five Starr Wrestling Report. We are the wrestling channel nobody knows but everybody needs. Here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays to bring you all kinds of fun wrestling talk. Make sure you subscribe, comment, and give the show a like if you don't mind. Wherever you decide to watch, whether on YouTube or Rumble, I still appreciate all the viewership I can get. I drove down to Cleveland a few days ago and did not expect it to be as cold as it was. It was 40-something degrees when I left Worcester that morning. An hour later when I showed up in downtown Cleveland, it had to have dropped at least 15 degrees. I mean, I had a coat, but it was not the coat I needed. Let that be a lesson to anybody who travels or makes semi-lengthy trips. Bring extra layers. Now, the reason I bring that up is I was listening to some podcasts on the way down and back. I basically did a round-trip visitation in the same day. I always love listening to Jim's podcasts. Although I wish he'd go back to talking more about classic wrestling, because God, the modern reviews are just so dry. I get a lot of that stuff is supposed to be rage bait for viewers. I mean, he's got to market and cater to where his numbers are. People, for whatever reason, love hearing Jim talk about how crappy modern wrestling is. I love crapping on it too, but Jim's a much better storyteller than I am. But I'm actually going to give him a quick plug here because his stuff has popped up in my video feed quite a bit. And I normally just listen to his clips. I don't really listen to any of his full-length podcasts. But Stevie Richards, go give him a listen in your spare time. He's got some really insightful analyses. I forget his co-host's name. I've seen him before. He's got a really thick British accent. But, he seems like a chill dude. But yeah, I was catching some Stevie clips on the ride. He's got a good thing going with his channel as well. I think his niche is more geared toward the modern product. But he's also talked about his early career. A lot of ECW talk. He had a full-length show dedicated to talking about his health. I didn't know at one point that he had a back infection that was nearly fatal. And that was only a couple of years ago, I think. But he's a smart guy. Definitely has a good mind for the business. Don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but he's got a lot of good takes. He's a credible source. Anyhow, why don't we get into this NWA show? Because I've got a show to do, gosh darn it. Can't just spend an hour plugging other people's content. And I know what you're all thinking. After all the crazy stuff that we saw in last week's television show, Great Muta's debut, Michael Hayes' heel turn in the Omni, the debut of Ranger Ross, even through all of that, the more important question to address: did we get another appearance from Snake Brown? Oh, we got Snake Brown. Wait until you hear who he wrestled. You want to talk about troll jobs? You know, it's interesting. A couple weeks ago, I sat here and talked about how things weren't really looking all too promising for the NWA. The last month of programming has been largely crummy. Well, they're definitely making a concerted effort to try to be, at the very least, entertaining. And I'll take it. At least if the shows are going to suck, they can make it worth my while by giving me 2 hours of material to laugh at. Well, why don't we start from the top, because, well, that's usually a safe place to start, right? The Michael Hayes heel turn. Last week, they played the footage of him turning on Lex Luger in the Omni, helping Barry and Kendall Windham score a pinfall victory over him. Apparently, as we found out as of this particular taping, it was in fact an inside job the whole time. We began with JR at the interview podium, and he informed us that Michael Hayes would be joining him as the color commentator for this week. No explanation as to where Magnum TA was. They just decided to can him for whatever reason. And this is where I wrote, "So begins the musical chair rendition of NWA commentators throughout 1989, where they just kept cycling through one commentary team after another." So here comes Michael Hayes, accompanied by Hiro Matsuda. And let us all remember the chronic theme with NWA booking in '89. Shit just randomly happens for no discernible reason. Why did Michael Hayes randomly decide to take a payout from Matsuda to fuck over Luger? Because he's a greedy sumbitch. That was pretty much the entire explanation to justify Hayes turning heel. Matsuda made him an offer, and because Hayes likes money, he said, "Sure, the hell have I got to lose?" So I guess Matsuda is now acting as his manager, alongside Flair, Windham, Hacksaw Reed, and whoever else Matsuda's arbitrarily been associated with for the last 3 months. Now, I have a major important question regarding all this. Who assigned Michael Hayes to be the color commentator? Was it someone working for the network? Ted Turner? someone in the office like a Jim Hurd or a George Scott? Who made this call? And why was it never explained? Where was Magnum? Did Hayes beat him up in the parking lot? I don't know. Moreover, presuming that we, the audience, are supposed to view the company World Championship Wrestling as a babyface promotion, why in the world would you openly put one of your new top heels on television to serve as a mouthpiece to call your television program? Where you absolutely know you're going to get nothing but obnoxious, biased heel commentary the entire time? Well, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. Who's going to want to listen to that for 2 hours every week? Because did I mention, this is a permanent move. Air quotes. So much of this was just, why? And how? Anyway, we finally go to the ring for the Midnight Express taking on Chance Myers and the Raider. For those of you wondering, oh, the Midnight still exist on this program, huh? The answer is yes. Barely. Poor JR. At one point, he informed us that now, in addition to having Hayes as the color guy for the Saturday syndicated program, he also has the pleasure of calling NWA Main Event on Sundays with Paul E. Dangerously. He said, "I'm a lucky guy." And you could just hear the sarcasm rain out when he made that comment. Paul E. and Michael Hayes as your back-to-back color commentators. I'd have quit. Now, we talked about it last week with the Midnight Squash. Beautiful Bobby was in really rough shape around this time in '89. And I don't mean like in terms of physical conditioning. I mean, Bobby never had a great body to begin with. I just mean in terms of him dealing with a lot of injuries that accumulated over the previous couple years. I mean, the poor guy's never really had a lot of time off. But you could even see in this match, Stan was doing the bulk of the work. Bobby would tag in and do a couple things, but he definitely wasn't doing any of the traditional Bobby offense that we've seen in the previous couple years. He was just too banged up to really do much. They won with a double flapjack. The Raider got like maybe 30 seconds of offense before Stan and Bobby cut him off at the end. But, I mean, the bottom line is, this is the sad reality of where the Midnight Express were in the pecking order. They were a mid-card tag team just frolicking around and evidently getting served up to just about every other tag team on the roster, including the Samoan SWAT team, which is what they're setting up for at the next Clash. Then we came back to hear some pre-taped thoughts from Lex Luger in Albany, Georgia. He's got a couple challengers on his plate right now, including the likes of Barry Windham and Ric Flair. At the same time, he's not forgotten about what Michael Hayes did. Told Flair that once upon a time he claimed that he'd never give Luger another world title shot after Starrcade. And now the roles are reversed. But Luger's not ducking the challenge. If Flair wants a shot at the U.S. heavyweight title, he can come get one. And he told Hayes that he doesn't know what influenced him to turn his back, but he can expect everything he did to Luger to be paid back tenfold. Or doublefold, as he stated here. Not sure what that means. But this next part made me laugh. we go back to the booth where JR is trying to get Hayes to explain his motivations for turning. And this was essentially his conclusion. Hayes wanted to be a part of the Yamasaki Corporation, which was run by Hiro Matsuda. Mind you, a faction that purely existed in name only because J.J. Dillon abruptly left the NWA a couple months ago. And rather than completely disbanding the Four Horsemen and just everybody going their own separate ways, now that Tully and Arn weren't in the picture anymore, they somehow figured that they could just rebrand the Horsemen, now with Matsuda filling the JJ role. So, in a very piss-poor attempt at replicating the greatest faction of all time, the Yamasaki Corporation is a group that consists of Ric Flair, Barry Windham, Kendall Windham, Butch Reed, and Michael Hayes. And this is a quote, I shit you not. Michael Hayes actually said this out loud. We run the NWA. Yes, these are the front runners of the National Wrestling Alliance in 1989. Ric Flair, Barry Windham, Kendall Windham, Butch Reed, and Michael P.S. Hayes. Laughable. Kendall Windham is a frontrunner in the NWA, according to Hayes. Yeah, this faction sucks balls. Not even gonna lie. By the way, if you're wondering, Tommy, you sound like you don't remember much about this group. It's because I don't. It was not even a blimp on the radar in terms of memorable standout moments in '89. Mind you, Barry Windham is about to leave this fucking company in less than a month. And these numbskulls are trying to book him and his younger brother as two of the top heels in the organization. Did I mention one of them is Kendall Windham? God, these people had no idea what they were doing. So we had Dr. Death and Kevin Sullivan taking on Bob Emery and Dwayne Bruce. And I have a correction to make. Well, not even really a correction, just something I completely overlooked last week and never even pieced it together. Turns out Dwayne Bruce is a much bigger deal than I gave him credit for. I had completely forgotten about this. Did you know that Dwayne Bruce, not only does he end up getting repackaged later on to Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker, he ends up running the WCW Power Plant Developmental Program in the late 90s. I had no memory of that. I never once thought that Dwayne Bruce would wind up training the likes of Goldberg, The Big Show, so many of those later names we would see show up during the Nitro era. So there you go. All you Bill Goldberg fanatics out there, you can thank Dwayne Bruce for helping him become a household name. And or Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker of State Patrol. Who? Exactly. Meanwhile, at the same time we're talking about an NWA jobber becoming the head trainer for WCW's developmental program in about 8 years' time, Michael Hayes is on commentary saying the guy ought to be pumping gas at the local Texaco station. So you make of that as you wish. Williams and Sullivan spent most of the match beating on Bruce. They worked his arm over for a while. Williams did a bunch of power moves. Sullivan charged with a couple running knees as Bruce was caught in the tree of woe. And then Williams hit a running stampede for the pin. I wrote some stuff down about the U.S. tag titles, but I will address that in the clip they air later on. For those of you that forgot that the Varsity Club were the previous U.S. Tag Team Champions, you're not alone. I had no idea. And I've been reviewing this show. Then we had another Paulie Danger Zone Talk segment. This is now, I believe, week 4 of Paul doing these weekly 3-minute TV segments. I'm already over it. This was absolutely baffling to me. So Paul brings out his guest, and I use air quotes around that because any sane host that considers Cougar Jay a special guest is a fucking moron. So Cougar Jay saunters into the frame so Paul can run him up the flagpole. And while he's talking, who should show up but Randy Rose? Now, you'll recall, about a month ago, Randy was the one that dropped the fall in the Loser Leaves NWA match between the original Midnight vs. Midnight match at the Chi-Town Rumble. So, he casually shows back up here with a contract in hand. He's eagerly telling Paul that NWA re-signed him for, again, reasons that were never explained. I mean, it's not like Randy was screwed at the Chi-Town Rumble. The guy lost clean as a sheet in the middle of the ring. So he really didn't have an out. But anyway, he's under the assumption that Paul's going to be back on board with serving as his manager. Only problem is Paul's not really down for this idea. He blamed Randy for losing 2 of the most important matches for the original Midnights at both Starrcade and the Chi-Town pay-per-view. So by him hitching his wagon to Randy Rose, he'd be lowering his standards. Which is a very polite way of him just saying, "You're a piece of shit, and I want nothing to do with you." So they already buried Randy Rose upon return. And if that wasn't bad enough, as Randy's going off on Paulie and talking about how he sacrificed everything to save Paul's career, Jack Victory sneaks up from behind and he clobbers Randy in the back of the head with some kind of gimmick. Couldn't catch what it was, but apparently it was something that closely resembled glass, because it shattered into about 1 million pieces. And they also beat up Cougar Jay just because he was standing there like a dipshit, I guess. Victory gave them 2 of the worst pile drivers I think I've ever seen. He didn't even attempt to make it look like he was trying to kill them. Looked like how you would give a pile driver to your friend in the living room on a carpeted floor. And, well, they sure made Randy Rose look like the world's biggest idiot, didn't they? He returns to the company after losing at the Chi-Town Rumble. He immediately gets punked out by Paul Heyman when he finds out that he doesn't want to manage him anymore. Then he gets pile-driven by Secret Service agent Jack Victory on the concrete floor like an absolute dolt. Could you have attempted to make this guy look like a bigger geek? What a complete, utter burial. And again, the theme of NWA in '89. Shit randomly happens. Randy Rose is back in the NWA after a loser leaves town match where he lost the pinfall because random shit is happening for no reason. Why not? And presumably he will now feud with Jack Victory in singles competition. And or he will be teaming up with Cougar J. Seriously, how bad did this guy need the money? Because this is a drastic step down from what he was doing previously. We had Ranger Ross versus Max MacGyver. What was that thing I said the other week about Ranger Ross? How he was a decent athlete that could do a few things? Well, I take that back. He sucked in this match. Not only did he trip over his own foot trying to deliver a clothesline, I don't think he did a single arm drag takeover in this match that didn't look sloppy. I was also distracted by Hayes' awful commentary, so that probably didn't help. The only thing I wrote at the end was, Iron Sheik walks around the ring with the Iranian flag. Ranger Ross no-sells a double foot stomp from MacGyver and then hits a combat kick for the 3. And then Sheik went over to the podium to talk about how great the Middle East was and then showed off his hideously over-bloated beer gut. And I about vomited. And from there we came back for another truly iconic segment featuring the world's greatest jobber. Now this is actually pre-taped for one of the syndicated shows. I think it was actually in Albany, Georgia. Same location that Luger cut that promo earlier. This was indeed the match they booked for the card. Snake Brown versus World Heavyweight Champion Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Somebody was putting that card together and said, "Hey Ricky, see if you can get anything out of this clown." Lord knows that Sting was able to the week prior. I think Ricky took it as a personal challenge. Now, for those of you that did not see my review the other week, go listen to my recap of Sting versus Snake Brown on the TBS Superstation. You'll get a better idea of who Snake Brown was. He was a pure 100% gimmick. If you can just imagine the most generic, stereotypical cartoon jobber of the 80s, that was Snake Brown. He legitimately looked like he lived under a bridge. And I'm not even insulting homeless people when I say that. He was a very pasty white, out-of-shape dweeb with buggy whipped arms and a hideous gray hairdo. I have no idea how Ricky got roped into having to wrestle this jack off, but hey, the guy was a pro. He said, "Sure, I'll wrestle him. It's not going to be good, but I'll take one for the team." And it went about as you would expect. Snake Brown was overly theatrical with everything he did, including the selling. Anytime he took a bump, he'd basically sell it like how The Rock used to sell stunners, just flopping all over the place like a goddamn fish. Instinctually, I think Ricky knew how horrible this was, but he just had to try to go out there and wrestle it like a straight match, which is why it was so funny. Like, even Sting couldn't help but laugh the other week when he was working with Snake on television. I think Ricky was genuinely confused. Like, seriously, they let this guy on television? Who trained him? So he did his best. He ended up hitting a diving crossbody on Snake for the pin. Then he went over to cut a promo at ringside where he talked about how he's not going to be a closeted world champion. He'll wrestle any challenger, anytime, any place. That goes for Ric Flair, Dr. Death, Mike Rotunda, Barry Windham. Anyone that wants a crack at him. And I'll admit, he said a bunch of other stuff here, but the audio was such shit. I couldn't make heads or tails of what he was trying to say. But the people were going crazy for him, which was half the problem, because they just drowned him out entirely. I know he was talking about Flair at one point, and we obviously know what that's setting up for the Clash. 2 out of 3 falls, the big rematch, the one they didn't promote on television because George Scott's a fucking idiot and thought promoting the Clash of Champions for the Superdome would kill the house show attendance. It really is like watching a monkey try to fuck a football. The Office was just beyond incompetent. We also had Flair chime in with some comments at the booth here, saying Ricky's going around trying to convince the nation that he's superior to Ric Flair just because he has the World Heavyweight title. But now Ricky's got to prove to everybody, including Flair, that come bell time, he can get the job done again when they stand face-to-face in their rematch. Whether it's Baltimore, Maryland, New Orleans, Louisiana, or Pope Joy, Iowa. By the way, I looked that up just to be sure. Yes, that is an actual fucking city. Along with Hooker, Oklahoma, which might be my favorite. Remember the gimmick with Flair, though. It's the Will Sasso approach. You just name big cities and big towns and then assume they're all equal in population and metropolitan appeal. The only other thing to note about Flair's promo was him talking about having a bigger ego than Ted Turner, to which I wrote, that's a pretty big fucking ego. And that took us to the Samoans versus Tony Suber and Mike Justice. Paul did confirm here. It was a phone that Jack Victory allegedly broke over Randy Rose's head. So Paul's phone apparently is made of glass. He also told us that he apparently called Dennis Condrey in Aspen, Colorado to let him know about the Randy Rose situation. Dennis approved of the attack. Which is not only funny because, well, not only is it something you would expect a heel to say, it's also something that I would totally expect a Dennis Condrey to say. Even though he's no longer employed for the company, just totally throwing his old tag team partner under the bus. So the Samoans beat some ass for a while. There was a funny sequence where Tony Suber tried to no-sell a bunch of headbutts from Samu. And then Samu just came back and nailed him with a clothesline like 5 seconds later. Just totally made him look like an idiot. Fatu at one point gave one of the job guys a springboard something or other. I have no idea what he was attempting to do. He had the guy by the hair, and as he went to spring off the middle rope, he then just sort of fell down on top of the guy while driving his face into the mat. So that's what I coined it. a springboard something or other. Hey, not everything sticks. And then the Samoans went over with the Big Splash combo. Then we had a Midnight Express promo at the booth, which was, on its face, a very great promo from Jim Cornette. Also not entirely the promo I was expecting him to cut. He basically delivered a rah-rah pro-American speech where he belittled all the other countries and talked about how superior America was, which is awesome. But if you also know anything about Jim's political leanings, it just seemed a little out of character, especially because he's so anti-Trump. But he talked about all the foreign invasions currently happening in the NWA. It started with Paul Jones and the Russians trying to make a name at the Midnight's expense. And the Midnight's handled business by beating those two guys up and exporting them back to Gorbachev's clutches in Russia. Then you have Hiro Matsuda coming in and trying to buy all the services of the American talent, which Michael Hayes did not approve of. But, I mean, JC was not wrong. Then you have slobs like the Iron Sheik coming in and trying to force Iranian values down everybody's throats. Meanwhile, Iran sentences people to death for writing books, and they've already overtaken all the 7-Elevens in America. By the way, Stan and Bobby paw for that line. As did I. Because it was funny. And then in one of the most ironic, Jim hates Donald Trump, but Jim also just reiterated the exact same fucking campaign lingo that got Trump reelected in the 2024 election comments. He's talking about how he's got no problem with foreign citizens coming over to the U.S. to better their lives and try to live the American dream. But it's the problem with all these foreigners coming over illegally and trying to leech off government programs and stealing jobs from hardworking Americans. That's what JC takes issue with. Fully fucking agree. And you know what Trump's doing about that situation? He's deporting all the illegal foreigners who are solely coming over to this country to leech off government programs and steal jobs from hardworking Americans. But Trump is still the bad guy, from what I hear. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Great promo. He said they're going to send the Samoans packing just like they did all the other evil foreigners. Then we went back to the ring for the Great Muta versus Jerry Price. They are still referring to him as the Great Muta for the record, which is just... I can't even train myself to say that in the short term. It just doesn't roll off the tongue properly. It is so funny when I go back and watch Muta footage from '89, especially knowing how the fans took to him after a short while being there. He's trying so hard to be a heel. He's gouging at Price's eyes, taking cheap shots when he can. The crowd... I mean, here's the thing. They're not cheering him, but they're also not booing him whenever he would do something devious. Like, he's got this fucking wicked face paint on this week where his face is mostly painted red, but he's got both sides of his chin painted blue and green. So visually, it's the coolest thing you've ever seen. And the crowd was relatively lukewarm right up until he gave Jerry Price the cartwheel back elbow in the corner. And then he put him in the Muta lock for the submission. The people saw that and immediately started cheering like, holy shit, that was amazing. So he totally killed his heel persona in a matter of seconds. And I also can't blame the crowd, because how could you not like what you're seeing on television? Considering how innovative this was at the time for the American market, seeing this kind of stuff on a national stage. I mean, how much Japanese wrestling had the American market really been exposed to around this time? Not a lot. So this was very unique for the time. Then we go over to the podium where Gary Hart gave us a little more in-depth knowledge about Muta's background. Gary was so naturally gifted at getting over personalities and gimmicks. So this is perfect. Talked about how Muta's from the land of the rising sun, the cesspool of sin. He's the master of all who dare to step up and challenge him. I love this part. He starts talking about how Muta is the master of the 7 spokes of martial arts. Then he turns to Michael Hayes and goes, "Michael, you know very well about the 7 classes of martial arts." Michael just responds with, "Sure do." Lie. That, my friend, is a fucking bold-faced lie. I do not believe for a second that Michael Hayes knew a thing about martial arts. Have you seen him wrestle, Gary? So that made me laugh. He was so proud of himself, too. Like, you know it, Gary. I know everything there is to know about Muay Thai and Taekwondo. Spell Muay Thai and Taekwondo, Michael. I dare you. So Gary basically challenged anybody to try to step up to wrestle Muta. Then they had a great cutaway where he went to shake Hayes' hand. Right before they pitched a break, Hayes just casually tells Gary, "You don't have to acknowledge JR. This is my show now." Heels being douchebags. Gotta love it. So then we return from break to catch the footage of the U.S. tag titles changing hands. The former champions Dr. Death and Kevin Sullivan dropped the belts to Eddie Gilbert and Rick Steiner. And going back to what I said earlier, if you had asked me a couple weeks ago, who are the current NWA United States Tag Team Champions? I'd have probably given you the same answer if you were to ask me, who are the current World Tag Team Champions? I had no fucking clue. Offhand, I cannot recall the last time we saw either of those belts on television. The last time I even remember thinking about the World Tag titles was probably back when the Road Warriors squashed the Midnight Express in the Superdome right before Starrcade 88. I don't think we've seen the Road Warriors on TV since. I vaguely recall seeing the Varsity Club defend the U.S. tag straps against the Fantastics at the last Clash. But I don't think we've seen them physically carrying the belts on TV. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I haven't seen them with the belts. Not to completely discount what happened in the match here, because it was a very good tag match. It was actually a great tag match, even with the edited highlight clips. You had the nice story arc going on where the babyfaces had control early on. Eddie Gilbert got the early hot tag from Rick after he'd taken a gnarly bump out to the floor through the ropes. And then Eddie got cut off by Sullivan so the heels could work over his shoulder for a while. And that's been a recurring body injury for Eddie Gilbert in a lot of his matches, the bad right shoulder. So they got some heat on him for a while. It ends up with everybody getting into a fight at the end. And right as Sullivan decked Gilbert with a clothesline, he tried to lure Missy Hyatt into the ring. But then Gilbert reached out and schoolboyed Sullivan for the pinfall. This next part was awesome. JR's asking if Rick Steiner wants to chime in with any commentary, because he, Eddie, and Missy were out at the booth while they were airing the match. And it's one of those awkward television moments where JR tries to pitch to the slow-mo replay way too early, and he keeps asking if Steiner wants to comment on the slow-mo. And they're waiting for it. They're waiting for it. It's just not coming up. So JR's like, well, I guess we can wait a minute. And when we finally do get the slow-mo recap, JR goes, Rick, you got anything to say? And I'm pretty sure Rick Steiner broke kayfabe here, because you can hear him irritably respond with, the people can see it for themselves. They've got eyes. And I sat there like, you know, that is the most sane, rational thing I think I've ever heard Rick Steiner say. He's not wrong. So yeah, new U.S. Tag Team Champions. I'm sure you're all just elated to hear that news. And I actually got a little curious when I saw them air this, because I do not remember a single thing about the U.S. Tag Team Championships ever being defended in 1989. So out of curiosity, I went to the trusty old WCW U.S. Tag Team Championship wiki page, and I scrolled down to the title reign section to see what the hell was going on with these belts in 89. Here's what this is all leading to. Keep in mind, this particular match was taped on February 28th on Worldwide in Columbia, South Carolina. They are only now getting around to airing this on tape delay. So Eddie and Rick have had these belts for the better part of a month. They won the belts in February, and they apparently hold on to the belts until May of 89, wherein the belts are then stripped and vacated because, well, as we know, Rick ends up going on to team with his brother Scott. There's no mention of them ever dropping the belts to anybody. There are no notable title defenses listed. So they apparently just decided at one point, fuck it, we don't need the belts. And they are held up until February of 1990, where they finally hold a tournament to crown new champions, which is then won by the team of Brian Pillman and Tom Zenk. Wow. Why even bother? I don't even know what to say to that. I mean, at that point, they may as well have just canned the fucking things all together, throw them in the garbage can. Remember those classic U.S. tag title matches with the Midnights and the Fantastics back in the spring and summer of 88? The Midnight versus Barry Windham, Ronnie Garvin television match in 87. Holy fuck. Yeah, I miss those days. Those days are long gone, brother. We had a Varsity Club promo, minus Dan Spivey, which was probably for the better. I don't know where he was at. Probably got injured walking through the door to the studio that day. So Sullivan's going off on how Eddie Gilbert and Rick Steiner cheated to win the U.S. tag straps. And while the Varsity Club may have lost the belts, They also gained a lot of knowledge in the process. I honestly have no idea what he was talking about here. All I remember is he started referencing how great the University of Oklahoma was, mentioning how there are no scandals and it's a great educational field for the likes of producing talent like Dr. Death. And I'm looking at JR's reaction the whole time. He's rolling his eyes, making these weird facials through the whole thing. Did he know something we didn't? What was going on at the University of Oklahoma? I mean, I know there's always sketchy activity happening in the academic fields, especially with administration. But JR seemed to have a little bit of insider knowledge here. Should have clued us in. So then Dr. Death chimed in, said that he has a great education. He also has a degree. That's actually a great line. I'm well educated, and I have a degree. Translation: I have a useless piece of paper saying that I'm qualified to do something that I'm barely qualified for in the first place. That is college in a nutshell. Don't go. Then they all started talking about everybody's individual strengths in the group. Mike's a great team captain. Sullivan is a great mind and a great intellectual. Dr. Death is the muscle of the group. And Dan Spivey is, well, he's a great scouter. The fuck is that supposed to mean? A great scouter? What's he scouting? His next trip to the hospital? And right before they pitch back to the ring for Rotunda's TV title defense, JR's basically raking him over the coals and saying he refuses to put his title up against credible challengers like Steiner and Sting. To which Rotunda responded by saying, they'll get their chance. But right now he has more suitable competition in the ring waiting. And that better competition came in the form of Greg Brown, qualified TV title opponent for Rotunda this week. It took JR approximately 4 weeks to finally figure out that Rotunda is intentionally picking his own opponents for these weekly TV title defenses. Boy, nothing gets by Jim, does it? They wrestled for a minute. Rotunda won with a sugar hold stretch. And then Dr. Death came in and stomped on Greg just to be a dick. That was funny. Then we came back for a Ranger Ross interview. And I'm sorry to say, but any credibility that Ranger Ross may have had prior to this interview, he completely killed it here. The minute he looked at the camera and with a straight face referred to the Iron Sheik as Mr. He just pulled a Ron DeSantis. He DeSantis'd himself. I can no longer take him seriously as a viable threat. He may as well have just referred to him as Buster Brown. You cannot get any more Caucasian than referring to another person as Mr. Especially when you're trying to challenge him to a fucking fight. I dare any of you, next time you get into an altercation with somebody, call that person by Mr. See how that works for you. Well, I oughta put your dukes up there, Buster Brown. I've got a bone to pick with you, mister. We're gonna settle our score right now and go our separate ways. So I pretty much zoned out on the rest of this. And that was followed with the Iron Sheik beating Richard Sartain in the weekly installment of How in the Fuck Is This Guy Still on Television Squashes. I wrote 2 words. Fucking rotten. And I meant every bit of it. Then we closed out with a Dick Murdoch and Vince Young versus Lee Scott Enforcer match. Absolute clock in, clock out mode for Dickie. He probably showed up at the studio that day and saw he was teaming with Vince Young. First thing he said was, "Can you just send me my release papers now?" He tried to pull off the Enforcer's mask at one point, but I don't even think Dick could muster up the energy to try here. He pinned Lee Scott with a corkscrew elbow. Did I ever mention that Vince Young sucked? Not only was the gimmick absolutely terrible, his wrestling may have been worse. He overshot a clothesline. For anybody asking, how is that remotely possible? I couldn't tell you. But he certainly managed to fuck it up. He also nearly shattered his ankles going for a double axe. God. Horrible match. Fuck whoever decided to have Dick Murdoch be a part of this thing. He deserved better. Should have turned on Vince at the end and beat him up. Yeah, the last 20 minutes of the show was abhorrently bad. I honestly didn't even mind the first hour and a half. Even if it wasn't all that great. As long as I can find stupid shit to laugh at, I'm good. We all know how much the quality of this product is dipping. And it's only getting worse and worse as the months go by. And until they give Ric Flair the book later this year, along with some brain power like Jim Cornette and Kevin Sullivan to help bounce ideas off of, this is peak George Scott, Jim Herd, Turner era booking, folks. It is not good. Not good at all. But hey, here's the good news. Next week it's the Clash of Champions. And we are going to review that show from the Superdome. WCW didn't do jack shit to promote it on TV. Does a horrible rating, despite it being in the Superdome and having Flair and Steamboat in the 2 out of 3 falls match for the world title. How in the hell could anybody possibly screw that up? Well, WCW did. But there's one redeeming thing to take away from it. Even though that show was an utter disaster, at least they fucking fired George Scott because of it. And on that note, completely unrelated note at that, let's move on to Mid-South Wrestling Television. Sorry, I'm just trying to drown out the screaming people upstairs. I don't even know if you can hear that right now. Sometimes I wonder if I should be reporting some kind of domestic dispute. This guy that lives up above me is always screaming at somebody. I don't know if it's a girlfriend, fiance, or what. Apparently he's under the assumption that the walls are made of soundproof iron. I mean, I'm always trying to be cognizant of the way I talk into the microphone because the neighbor's on my floor. I think this guy thinks he owns the entire goddamn building. Anyway, you got some serious business to cover here in the opening 10 minutes of Midsouth. If you haven't already, make sure you go back and listen to last week's review to catch up on the latest Midsouth TV coverage, because they had a lot of tremendous stuff take place on the last episode, not the least of which was everything involving the Midnight Express, specifically the interaction between Jim Cornette and Bill Watts. And a lot of that came to a head on this week's taping, as they pitched to Boyd Pierce and Jim Ross at the commentary table to open the program. It is revealed that a very heartbreaking, serious incident occurred just before the cameras went live. Now, originally, Bill Watts was supposed to call the show alongside Boyd, but now we come to find out that something happened to him. By the way, before I actually break down everything that happened here, Boyd Pierce did a brilliant job selling all this. He had that classic Boyd scowl the entire time JR's going over the timeline and talking about the severity of the situation. And Boyd's just shaking his head, totally beside himself. And it actually took a minute to get to the meat of what happened to Bill. First, we had a Terry Taylor promo where he was hyping up his TV title match with Butch Reed for later in the program. Then they played a Terry Taylor video package, which was the same highlight package they aired a while back when Taylor had been in the territory for about a month. Then we get a highlight package for Butch Reed. Then we get an interview with Butch Reed. And then finally we get to the angle. So Reed's cutting the heat promo on Taylor, talking about how he's going to win the TV belt and the 10 grand. And right in the middle of his promo, they cut to a wide shot from the floor cam perspective where you see Jim Cornette giving Watts a verbal tongue lashing from way off in the distance. Of course, he's too much of a coward to confront Watts again. So he's basically out there doing ventriloquism gestures with his hands while he's yelling obscenities to Watts. And Watts is standing there like, somebody get this giant sissy out of here. And this goes on for about a half a minute while Reed and Watts are trying to wrap up their interview. And finally, you start to hear the Shreveport crowd react to something because they see what's coming. Turns out it's Bobby and Dennis who attack Bill Watts from behind with a blackjack and start putting the boots to him. And as the Midnights are ghetto-stomping Watts into oblivion, you know, I actually don't even remember why this particular moment stands out to me above everything else. Every time I go back and watch this clip, the first thing I think of with this angle is the camera shot where you see Butch Reed just nonchalantly walking away from the crime scene as Watts is getting stomped on and killed. Doesn't do a thing to help. Never tries to intervene. He just washes his hands of the whole thing and says, I'm not getting any of this on me. And it's one of those things where it's very subtle, but it also stands out considerably. And figure, well, the guy's a heel. It's highly unlikely he's going to help out another babyface, even if it's the guy running the territory. But that's a low ball move, even for a guy like Butch Reed. Come on, man. The guy writes your fucking paycheck. The least he can do is try to talk some sense into Cornette. But it was great, too, because even if a guy like Butch Reed doesn't have a personal vendetta with Bill Watts, the fact that he didn't even join in on the fight, he just looked the other way, shook his head, and tried to avoid getting any on him. that's one of those things where you're like, well, he also could have been doing this to save his own ass. God forbid Watts would have just decided to outright fire the Midnight Express instead of coming out of retirement to fight them in a match. Spoiler. If Reed would have gotten involved, he'd have been in some tough shit. So this is all perfectly done. Watts did the blade job. The Midnights got their heat back on them after everything that went down last week. It's great stuff, man. Sets everything in motion for where they're taking this storyline in April as they're building to the showdown at the last Stampede at the Superdome. And we'll talk about all the inner details as we cover each subsequent episode. And that bled into the Midnight Express's TV match with Obi Davis and Josh Stroud. Of course, we also got the great heel promo from JC beforehand, talking about how the Midnight Express don't hold anything sacred in the Mid-South area, even though the fans might hold Bill Watts to such standards, saying he found out what happens when you try and cross the Midnights. Like, everything about it was so seamless because in addition to the Midnights already having a ton of nuclear heat for what they had done to Watts prior in the taping, now Cornette's going over to the commentary table to overtake the segment. Basically for him to call the entire match and not let Boyd or JR get a word in edgewise. Not that Boyd was ever going to say anything anyway. So he's over there doing his heel biased commentary, putting over Bobby and Dennis and doing everything to be an obnoxious prick. Meanwhile, the Midnights are in there picking their teeth with these guys. We had another near fatality where beautiful Bobby went to pick up Stroud to get him in position for the Gravedigger. And of course, he nearly lost Stroud when he had him up in the vertical suplex. So Dennis had to muscle him up onto his shoulder without trying to kill him. And they hit the move. They do not, in fact, go for a pinfall. Not entirely sure what was going on there. Dennis looked a little confused. All I know is Bobby came off the middle rope with an elbow drop and got the pin like 10 seconds later. And they beat up the other guy afterwards just because he was standing there, I guess. Now, what else can you say, man? This is one of the best pieces of business Bobby, Dennis, and JC did in their entire careers. It was a toss-up between this and their work with the Rock and Roll Express and the Fantastics over the next several years, both in Mid-South and Crockett. Because all those programs drew a ton of money. And that brought us back for Mr. Wrestling 2 versus Limpin' Lanny Poffo. And since JR had to slip out to be the ring announcer, it left an extra pair of headsets floating around. So naturally, you had to know Corny was going to immediately jump on the opportunity. So he's butting in as the guest color guy. And no one's going to stop him. It's not like Bill Watts was there. Boyd made sure to let everybody know that he did not approve of this. Told him that if he's going to commentate, he has to call the action tangibly. And that lasted all of about, I'd say 10 to 15 seconds. Almost every bit of dialogue from Cornette here. If it didn't directly involve him putting over the Midnights, it involved him making snide comments about Boyd Pierce's look and age. And I do have to concede, as great as he was here, I think I would still favor his 1986 commentary on the Saturday syndicated TBS show, just in terms of overall entertainment value. Although the banter between him and Boyd was pretty good. But then the problem becomes, I get so caught up in listening to Jim and Boyd go at it, I'm barely paying attention to anything happening in the match. And it is technically the first time seeing Wrestling 2 in action as a full-fledged heel. Cornette was all but saying, yeah, I mean, the match is fine, but it's nothing compared to what Bobby and Dennis are capable of doing. Translation, this is okay, boring chain wrestling, but nobody gives a shit. The only thing I wrote is, Wrestling 2 beats up Lanny for a while and wins with a running knee lift. So I guess Cornette was kind of right with his analysis. Then we came back for Crusher Khrushchev and Nikolai Volkov versus Randy Barber and John King. They also re-aired the clip of Hacksaw Duggan making his TV return last week, helping to fend off the Russians during a post-match brawl with Terry Taylor where they tried to choke him out with a hangman's rope. Of course, Jim Cornette had to then chime in by telling Boyd that he's a hypocrite. Anyone that calls out JC for using a tennis racket when Duggan's out there hitting people over the backs with boards, that is the definition of insincerity. So they wrestle for about a minute. Volkov gave Randy Barber the backbreaker power slam combo for the 3. I spent the whole time wondering how the hell Randy thought it was a good idea to wear flesh-colored ring trunks when he was paler than a jar of fucking mayonnaise with mustard yellow knee pads. In any case, right before they pitched a break, Boyd tells JC that one of them has got to leave the commentary table because this is out of control. And because Hacksaw Duggan is scheduled to wrestle next, Boyd has no problem having Duggan come over and usher JC out of the building personally. And this part's good. JC goes, well, it just so happens that I have to make a phone call home to my mother. So I'll go. But it's not because of you or Hacksaw Duggan making me go. I'm certainly not afraid of either of you. Yeah, I guess it really was that simple, right? All Boyd had to say was, hey, I know a big, scary, mean man that can come pry you off the headset. Could not get away with that in today's business. Jim Cornette's bigger than most of the boys in the business today. They wouldn't have been a threat to him. So we had Duggan versus Masayo Ito. And the first thing I wrote here was, holy fuck, Hacksaw Duggan was so over. Like, seriously, I do not remember Duggan being that over in Mid-South. I don't know if that was a combination of him being off television for a while, so the people were excited to see him back. Maybe the fact that people were kind of lukewarm on JYD during this period. Whatever the case was, he was the hottest babyface on this show. Of course, it didn't matter that the match sucked. I mean, they went crazy for everything Duggan did. He ends up leveling Ito with a spear. And right before he can go for the cover, the Russians hit the ring and try to go after Duggan with a board. And when I use the term board, I do not mean a 2x4. Nikolai runs out there with this scrawny little block of wood, maybe a quarter of an inch thick. It would not have been enough to knock Riho out cold. So, of course, Duggan just snatches the board away. And Crusher Khrushchev just kicks it in with his foot to break it in half. And as Volkov and Ito go to tie up Duggan with the hangman's rope so Khrushchev can tease knocking Duggan out with a coal miner's glove. Now remember the story. Duggan wants a coal miner's glove match with Khrushchev after the Tulsa angle where they put Duggan out of commission for a while. And that's when Duggan gets some help from the locker room babyfaces and the heels powder. It's a good afterbirth. And again, I cannot stress enough how popular Duggan was around this time. Like, he was always on the Mount Rushmore of top names in Mid-South. But I do not remember Duggan getting these kinds of pops, even going back to 83. And yeah, I know he was a heel for a good period of time, so I think the people were still kind of warming up to him a little bit. But trust me, nobody was booing him here. And I hate to use the dog as the catalyst, but I think he plays a major part in all this. When the Midsouth fans started to sour on JYD in '84, Duggan sort of became the de facto superhero for all the loyal ticket buyers. People really don't remember this, but the fans lost a lot of confidence in the dog. The attitude, the weight gain. I don't know how many people knew about the substance abuse problems, but they had to know that something was up with him, because he had drastically changed. And like Duggan never lost a step. And I think the people saw that and appreciated it. But that took us to the semifinal round of the TV title tournament. It's Hacksaw Butch Reed and Terry Taylor, with the winner advancing to the finals next week with Crusher Khrushchev. This is also where we finally got a medical update on Bill Watts, following the angle of him getting Pearl Harbor by the Midnights. And, well, the update was that he was taken from the building unconscious. And they were waiting to hear a status on his recovery. Great medical update. May as well have just said he was taken to a local medical facility. Boy, this turned into a hell of a match, didn't it? They really went balls to the walls with this one. They worked this like an old school main event house show match at the Superdome. Just working their asses off, going back and forth and dishing out everything they had, sweating like they've been trapped in the Sahara Desert for weeks. I mean, they ended up having this go to their final commercial pitch and then going all the way down to the wire, which I'll talk about more in a sec. But it's great back and forth action with Taylor controlling most of the early part, working over Reed's arm and shoulder and not giving an inch, not letting Reed getting any offense. Finally, Reed's able to cut him off and turn things in his favor for a short while. He's in power moves on Taylor and going for pin attempts left and right. Taylor's not staying down. They had a long sequence at the end where, Reed's trying to get Taylor to pass out in the chin lock, but Taylor's not giving up. And we get down to the closing minute. You see Taylor start to milk his comeback. He shoots Reed off the ropes. Big back body drop. Nails him with the atomic drop. Standing drop kick. And it's looking like Taylor is going to put it away in the last 10 seconds. But, the bell rings. And it signals a time limit draw. So now we got a real quandary. What happens now? One of these two are supposed to go to the finals next week to face Khrushchev. But without a winner being determined here, it leaves everything up in the air. So this is a great cliffhanger leading into next week. Try to see how they go about settling this. Do we get a 5-minute round between Reed and Taylor? Is Khrushchev automatically declared the winner of the tournament? We'll have to see. But that was a hell of a close to the show. One of the better TV main events we've seen on Midsouth in a while, just based on ring action alone. Now, in all fairness, it was going to be really hard to top what they did last week, especially in terms of memorable angles and overall enjoyment. But in terms of story progression, this is the week where we really saw them kick everything into a higher gear with the Midnight Bill Watts material. Get a little more TV exposure with Jim, giving him the chance to freestyle a little bit on camera and work up the snobby rich kid gimmick. He was cooking on commentary for those couple matches. The interplay with him, JR, and Boyd. Again, the only problem is that he was so entertaining on commentary, you couldn't really pay attention to the matches. And then you had the TV main event, which was great. I like them leaving us with a little bit of suspension to see how they settle the TV title finals. This is what Midsouth truly mastered back in '84 with Bill Dundee overseeing the book. That weekly episodic-like television where everything carried over into the next and you always had some kind of hook. And everything had layers to it. Nothing ever came off rushed or hastily thrown together. But at the same time, there was a sense of urgency to everything we saw. It's not like the bullshit you get with WWE today where they milk like 30 to 40 goddamn minutes of the show with nothing but ring entrances. Or the crowds hijack the shows with nonstop singing and chanting. Then they just get in the way of letting the talent get themselves over because the crowd's more obsessed with getting themselves over. I mean, there's a happy medium to all this. You can't do the AEW thing where you just throw shit at the wall week after week and nothing ever makes sense or carries over. But you also can't do the WWE thing where every single segment takes like 30 to 45 minutes to ever get to the fucking point. And it just bogs everything down. And it's why I refuse to watch modern wrestling television. I can't do it. Until we get something on par with what Midsouth was doing in 1984, I have no incentive to tune into Raw, SmackDown, or Dynamite. Because I know what to expect. It's the same garbage week after week, month after month. Nothing changes. Like all the people out there that try to say one product is better than the other, they both suck, people. Wake the fuck up. All right, let's bring the temperature down here. Let's talk about world-class television for this week. Had a couple interesting things of note going on with this particular episode. Not the least of which was the return of the Fantastics. By the way, I did rewatch that documentary on World Class Championship Wrestling. The one that WWE put out in like 2007. The Triumph and Tragedy. Because you had to figure WWE was going to dress that up. Had to make it sound theatrical. I mean, it's a good documentary. Obviously, it's told from the WWE perspective, so there's a lot of bias in it. But still, having those talking heads like Kevin Von Erich and Skandar Akbar, Gary Hart, Freebird Michael Hayes, Wild Bill Irwin. That kind of helped to balance out the Triple H's and the Mick Foleys and the Gerald Briscoes of the world, who made every concerted effort to put over WWE at the expense of the territories. Definitely go watch that in your spare time, though. It's very informative. But getting into the TV show for this week, we open with Steve Regal taking on newcomer to the Dallas region, although he'd already been around the territories for several years as of this point. Brickhouse Brown, baby. Hell yeah. Love me some Brickhouse Brown. First time I ever saw footage of him was in Midsouth during the post-JYD years. I think he was there for most of '85. Obviously working underneath matches at the time. But that was during Watts' phase of let's trot out a bunch of young, good-looking black baby faces and see if any of them can replace the dog. Tried it with Brickhouse. Tried it with Sonny King. Tried turning Butch Reed babyface and running with him on top. He tried it with, oh God, what was his name? The Snowman? can't even remember what his real name was. He didn't last long. Now, granted, Brickhouse Brown was no junkyard dog, but he was cool. He was a slender guy, but he was in great shape, had good charisma. I watched a little bit of footage of him from Memphis in like 86 or... No, maybe it was a little later than that. When did they do the whole thing with him in the stud stable and the watermelon angle? Was that 88? I remember reading about the controversy that whole thing drummed up around that time. This was a pretty fun match, though. Brickhouse managed to get himself over as one of the hottest babyfaces on the roster by the end of this thing. It was a pretty standard babyface heel dynamic with Regal going to the well with all the usual heel behaviors. It's always a bummer when you're watching this stuff on the network timeline because, I mean, you know that each segment is broken up with some kind of ad or infomercial. So when I look down and I see the timestamp for this match, my immediate thought was, oh yeah, they're definitely going to a 10-minute draw. But they kept it moving. The match didn't bog down. Finish saw Brickhouse make a big fiery comeback. There's a cool spot where Regal's begging off in the corner while Brickhouse is right in the middle of his comeback. Like a minute later, you hear the timekeeper ring the bell to sound the end of the match. And then Regal's doing the index finger to the head gimmick. Like, yeah, I outsmarted this numbskull. All I had to do was stall in the corner to avoid getting pinned. Then, of course, afterwards, you get Brickhouse arguing with Bronco Lubitsch, saying, well, I should win on account of earning the most points. Like it's a boxing match. Apparently, Brickhouse didn't understand how professional wrestling rules work. But I like the afterbirth where Regal clubbed Brickhouse from behind and tried to get some heat back on himself before he got run off. So if they keep the feud going, I certainly won't complain about it. They had a good first showing here, so why not? Run it back. Okay, I have to read exactly what I wrote down here because it's actually really funny when I see it on paper. World Class hypes the Freebird Von Erich 6-man championship match for Texas Stadium on May the 4th by showing a tape from Fort Worth where the Freebirds are wrestling the Von Erichs in a 6-man tag. So, they hyped the 6-man by giving us a 6-man with the exact same talent like a month beforehand. I mean, this would be like WWE building to John Cena versus Cody Rhodes on night 2 of WrestleMania by doing John Cena versus Cody Rhodes in the main event of SmackDown like 3 weeks before. No, I don't know if this was non-title. I don't think it was ever established from Mark Lawrence. Not that I was expecting him to. The guy barely knew how to call a headlock, much less keep up with whether or not a title match was at stake. Of course, I'm not going to go blow for blow with another Freebird Von Erich match. I mean, I've only done 8,372 other reviews of this exact same match. The spamming of the pile driver spots was a little annoying. But other than that, it was a pretty ordinary Von Erich Freebird clusterfuck showdown. Not that that's a bad thing, because the crowd was hot for it. I don't know when this happened in the match, but when they started airing the clip, you could tell it was like at least 5 minutes into it. Terry Gordy's wrestling with a giant bandage tape stuck to his hair. And of course, Gordy's hair was wildly out of control by this period. So I'm just laughing as he's taking bumps with this huge wad of tape lodged in his perm. I also had a good laugh watching Kerry Von Erich react to everything on the apron. if you've ever watched a tag match with Kerry where he's standing on the apron, watch his reactions to everything. I mean, he sells more than the guys taking the bumps in the ring, jumping up and down, running back and forth from the ring posts. I mean, I hate to infer that he was probably on something, but who even knows? But he was going crazy here. What else? Well, yeah, the obligatory six-man brawl with everybody. There's a very clunky spot where Buddy Roberts and Kerry were sort of grappling and trying to wait for Gordy to get in position to break up the pin attempt when Kerry went to cover Buddy. And then after Gordy clobbered Kerry in the back of the head, Buddy rolled on top and pinned him. So the heels win. And since they were already the champions, I never really considered whether or not this is a title match, but presuming it was non-title, at least it gives the babyfaces a chance to get revenge. Again, going back to what I said earlier, they showed a pre-taped six-man with the Von Erichs and the Freebirds, literally so they can just wind up doing the exact same match about a month later at Texas Stadium. I don't particularly get that logic, but as I've said many times, I never really understood much of Ken Mantell's booking in World Class to begin with. He was still the booker by this point, right? I know he ends up leaving to go to the UWF to book for Watts at some point, but can't remember if that was 86 or 87. And from there we had Rick Rude taking on Steve Simpson. Steve Simpson. What Jungle Jackoff could have been in AEW if Tony Khan had a fucking clue how to book babyfaces properly. The young, scrappy, good-looking, clean-shaven kid with the cool long hair and moderately decent physique. Although Simpson was a much bigger guy than Jack Perry was. Is. Did I hear this correctly? Did I hear Mercer on commentary say that the World Class fans were going to get to vote for Rick Rude's next opponent at Texas Stadium? Good Lord. Thank God the internet didn't exist back then. Could you imagine Marks trying to pick and choose challengers for regional world titles back in the 80s? Then, of course, they would boo if they didn't get the guy they wanted. I wonder who they're going to pick. The options are endless. I mean, they're really not. If it's not Kerry, Kevin, or Lance, who else is there? Bruiser, Brody? The Iceman? It's got to be one of the core Homestead guys. The closing minute to this match was epic, but before I talk about that, overall, they had an interesting layout here. Steve Simpson's obviously another new guy to the Dallas area, but he wasn't a traditional enhancement guy like a lot of the other underneath talent. I mean, they actually gave him some hope spots on Rude here, which the people popped for. I don't know if anyone actually believed he was going over Rude, but it did at least demonstrate that he was someone that they ought to take seriously or care about. I don't really know anything about Steve Simpson's career. I know the name, but never really followed any of his career accolades. But he held his own with Rude. His basics were good. He had good facials and good selling whenever he was getting worked over. But the ending, I've got to talk about this. You all know how much of a heat magnet Percy Pringle was back in the day. It actually wasn't too often you saw the Dallas faithful get physical by throwing shit toward the ring in the middle of a match. There's a spot right before the finish where Rude counters a monkey flip attempt from Simpson, and then Simpson takes the big bump and sells his back. Percy turns to the crowd and does his diabolical laugh. Someone tries to throw a handful of popcorn at Percy. They completely miss. And I don't mean like they hit the floor like 2 feet to the left of where he was standing. They overshot Percy entirely. The popcorn landed right on top of Steve Simpson as he's laying on the mat selling. And then Rude just picked him up and hit him with a DDT. I will be the first to tell you, I don't have the best aim in the world. But even my aim was not as bad as whoever attempted to throw this popcorn at Percy. They were trying to land the plane in Fresno, California, and found themselves crashing in a fucking Philly. Not even close. The next segment was pretty great too, not gonna lie. We had a lot of stuff on World Class this week. I just realized that. When's the last time I reviewed 5 different segments on a World Class taping? Most of the time it's either 3 or 4. But this was probably the best segment on the show looking back. And it was another pre-tape. So to set the stage here, they had apparently gotten down to the final fall in a 2 out of 3 falls match with John Tatum and Jerry Allen. This is in Fort Worth, by the way. And before they could ring the bell to start the third fall, Bruiser Brody had interrupted and grabbed the house mic to challenge the Freebirds to come out and fight. According to Mark Lawrence here, something had apparently gone down in El Paso the night before. I don't know what it was, because naturally he didn't explain it. But Bruiser was pissed off and he wanted to fight the Freebirds, so something obviously happened between those guys. Anyway, Terry Gordy runs down and starts getting into the brawl with Bruiser Brody in street clothes. And they fight all the way through the crowd up toward the locker room area. It was the classic they fought off cliche that we now coin in modern wrestling, where 2 guys grab each other and then brawl to the back while something else is going on in the ring. But in this case, the fight actually looked convincing because Gordy and Brody actually knew how to work. They didn't just grab each other and fight walk to the back. It was cool, though. You know, they had the camera shot where you see them fighting toward the KTV news van. There's a sequence where they try to slam this giant stage door in each other's faces. Looked like Godzilla meets the Ape Man out there. And they didn't hold back. It's Gordy and Brody. I would expect nothing less. I think Mercer said next week they'll both be part of the double main event feature. So, that'll be cool. Get to see a Terry Gordy, Bruiser Brody fight. A hoss fight. I would suspect they might try to further that for Texas Stadium without doing a blow-off. Although Gordy's currently roped in with the Freebird stuff for the 6-man titles. Unless he's pulling double duty on that card and ends up working some kind of Street Fighter no DQ match with Brody as well. We'll see, though. Fun little segment. And then we had the main event of the Fantastics taking on the Grappler and John Tatum. And these were not standard tag rules. This was a tornado tag with both teams going at it at the same time. And we also had Missy and Sunshine in the opposing corners at ringside. So there was a lot of activity going on here in what was already a very chaotic show to begin with. Now, we did see these 2 teams battle previously, so The tornado stipulation at least made sense. And by the time they came back from break, both teams were already going at it with the babyfaces throwing the heels around and having them bump around like pinballs. It is always challenging to call a tornado or, frankly, any kind of multi-man match. I mean, it's the same stuff you see in wrestling today. There's so much stuff happening at a given time, and especially during this time, without having a split screen to see everything happening, I mean, you're evidently going to miss something. For the most part, they had a basic formula with the two heels trying to isolate the one babyface while they had the other one on the floor. They kind of rolled with that up until the Fantastics started making their comeback. And then we get this great finishing sequence with Missy going to trip up Bobby Fulton in the ropes. And as Sunshine starts chasing after Missy, she ends up stealing a handful of French fries and ketchup from the vendor in the front row. Then she grabs Missy and stuffs the food in her face as a way to humiliate her. And that was just classic because, then the baby faces took advantage and then pinned the grappler while Tatum was distracted looking at Missy. And everybody in the building is pointing and laughing at her while she's got ketchup in her hair and poor girl's bawling her eyes out. Tommy Rogers gets on the mic and goes, "Tatum, I've never seen Missy Hyatt look so good." And then to make the heels look like even bigger bumbling idiots, they try to attack the Fantastics after the bell, only to get foiled again and sent packing. Then you see Missy leaving through the crowd by herself without Tatum. Uh-oh. So there's some drama going on there again. I see the breakup ensuing. But everything about this worked tremendously. And it kind of beat the generic angle of having Missy and Sunshine get into another pull apart or some kind of staged catfight that evidently wouldn't have looked great visually, because they've already done a few of those and they were what they were. Not very good. But this at least gave the people a chance to laugh and mock Missy without her needing to get physical. So it worked. I liked it. I mean, I would have totally stolen this as a booking finish if I were running a territory or some kind of regional promotion. This and having the heel manager get thrown into a cake. It'll never get old. But overall, really good episode this week. It was one of the better episodes of World Class we've covered in a while. Show had nice pacing. We had a lot of cool angles and fun segments that didn't make the show boring. I mean, it wasn't Midsouth in '84, but I usually revert back to the model of world-class booking in '85. It wasn't another interminable missing link in Killer Khan versus Kerry and Kevin Von Erich main event. When you really think about it, my standards are not that high. Just give me something better than the missing link, and I'll be satisfied. But I think that about wraps up that. So, we will reconvene on Monday for the next Retro Raw. The week out from that, that'll be the WrestleMania 12 review. So I gotta set aside some time to try to sit down and watch that show. And I think we still have another 3 weeks until WrestleMania 41 and that barn burner of a 2-night extravaganza. We'll see. But we do have some stuff coming up. So we'll try to keep that on our radar. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I'll catch you on Monday. Take care. Peace out.